Hi everyone, my name is Karen, this is my channel RatherBeReading, and today I'm bringing to you my December wrap-up. So the 2018 reading year is over. December was a pretty good reading month. So to jump straight into my statistics for the December reading month, I read a total of 19 books. I also DNF'd one further book. The 19 books was made up of 14 novels, 2 graphic novels, 1 novella, 1 children's novel, and 1 webcomic. I read 11 books in physical copy. I read 3 ebooks. I listened to 4 audiobooks, and I read 1 book online, which was the webcomic. So excluding the webcomic and the audiobooks, I read 8 books that I owned and 6 from the library. I read a total of 6,158 pages in the month of December, which averaged out to 199 pages per day. So that's just a touch below the 200-page average that I try to keep it at. So I'm still really happy with that. The shortest book that I read in December was only 15 pages. That was the novella that I read. It was a very, very short little novella. And the longest book that I read was 649 pages. So we've got very different ends of the spectrum kind of going on there. The highest star rating that I gave was a 4.25 stars this month, and the lowest star rating that I gave was a 2.5 star, which totaled out to an average star rating for the month of 3.38 stars, which isn't too bad for me. So I did film a mid-month wrap-up this month, which has the first 10 books plus the DNF. I talked about all of those books in that video, so I'll link that in the cards for you guys to check out if you haven't already. So I will just be talking about the 9 books that I read in the second half of the month in this video, so let's jump straight in. The first book I want to talk about is actually the final audiobook that I listened to for the year, and that was Under the Udala Trees by Chinelo Okparanta. This is a book set in Nigeria. It's basically a literary fiction that follows a young girl growing up during the time of the Nigerian Civil War. However, it follows her kind of for quite a period of her life, though, from when she's quite young to, up into her adulthood. And it basically follows her discovering her sexuality and but being a lesbian in a area, obviously in Nigeria, and a time where that was not acceptable. I enjoyed this novel. The author's note in particular really talked about the author's reasons for writing this story, about how laws have passed in Nigeria a few years ago that make it illegal to be in a same-sex relationship. And so I really appreciated the reason that the story was written. I enjoyed the story overall. Parts of it to me were a little bit slow and a little bit boring in parts, but there were parts that were really interesting. It was just kind of up and down in terms of that. And I also didn't find that the actual Nigerian war, the Civil War, played any real role in the story. I didn't think, but it's referenced a lot in the synopsis. There are questions at the end of the book to ask yourself, and that talks about the war a lot, but I just didn't really pick up on the war playing any real role in the story. But overall, I did really enjoy the book. It was really beautifully written, and I gave it 3.75 stars. I then read Sweet Reckoning by Wendy Higgins. This is the 3rd book in the Sweet series, so the 3rd book in what was originally, I believe, a trilogy. I enjoyed this. I thought it had a pretty good ending. Everything is very much tied up in a neat little bow in this type of series, and the author definitely does that. She kind of is one of those authors who seems to feel like they have to couple everyone off, which I just find really unrealistic in 17, 18-year-olds. And everything is a little bit too happy for me. There was a couple of things that I didn't think the author would do, and she did do them. So it did go to some places that I didn't quite expect the author to do, but it wasn't anything groundbreaking, just very run-of-the-mill, enjoyable type of trilogy. I gave this one 3.25 stars. Apologies if we've just had a camera angle change. I just had to clear out my memory card. So the next book that I read was Shroud of Roses by Gloria Ferris. This is the book that I was approved for on NetGalley. It is actually the 2nd book in a series, and I hadn't read the 1st book, but I couldn't get my hands on the 1st book, and it's one of those series where each mystery is kind of its standalone kind of mystery, and the only stuff that goes across the series is really the characters. And so I decided to just read it on its own. So this one it's set in a small town in Canada around Christmas time, and many years ago, I think it was about 15 years ago, the high school shut down, and the final thing that happened there was a graduation party for the most recent graduating class at that time. And now, 15 years later, a body has been discovered at the school now that it's about to be demolished, the old building. A body is found, and so we've got the mystery of what happened to this person. We follow the chief of police, who is not from the small town. He's like an outsider. And then we also follow a female character who is who he's in a relationship with, who grew up in the town and who was actually in the graduating class that last attended the high school. I enjoyed this. The mystery aspect wasn't super surprising. By the time we got kind of into the flow of the mystery, I figured out what was going on. That happens to me a lot. Doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the story. I personally, the female character Bliss, I personally really enjoyed her as a character. I do think that some people would find her really frustrating, and I can definitely see that because she's definitely can be selfish at times, but I just thought she was really like fun, interesting character to read about. It's definitely nothing groundbreaking in this, but I did really enjoy it, and in the end I gave that 3.5 stars. I then read Sweet Temptation by Wendy Higgins. This is the 4th book in the Sweet series, but is actually a book that follows one of the male characters' perspectives and goes back to the start, and you get basically all 3 books in the trilogy retold from his perspective. So because of that, it is longer than the other books. It's almost 500 pages, and quite frankly, I thought it was really unnecessary. This adds nothing to what we already know from reading the first 3 books. Because it's told from the male character's perspective, it's just a lot of him musing on how hot the female character is and how he really wants to be with her. And I even like some of the parts of the story where we weren't following this character because we were following the female character in the original trilogy. And so occasional things where you think, okay, we're going to get something new here because we weren't present for this, is kind of just really glossed over. Very unnecessary. I don't really think this book needed to be written at all, and in the end I gave this 2.75 stars, which is probably being a little bit generous if I'm being honest. Next, I read Christie and the Snobs by Anne M. Martin. This is book 11 in the Babysitters Club series. This one follows Christie in her new neighborhood that she moved into, and it's a much more affluent area than what she's used to, and it's about her trying to assimilate with the other kids in the area who are a little bit snobbish. This one is not that super interesting to me. It's not one of my favorites. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, and the reason I gave it 3.5 was because I did really like, well, not like, there is a pet death in this, which made me sob, and it was well done. And I did like that it was included in there for kids, because I did think it had a lot in there that kids could take away from it about putting a really old family pet down because they're suffering, and how that's better for them than them, you know, the life that they were living when they really are very unwell and very unhappy. And yeah, so it was really sad, but I did like that that was in there. And so I gave this 3.5 stars, as I said. I then read Shield by Rachel Craw. This is the 3rd and final book in the, I'm not sure if I think it's called the Spark series. The first book was called Spark. And this is a trilogy that follows a teenage girl who finds out that she is a shield. And shields are people who, they sometimes come across people who they'll have a spark with, which means that they need to protect that person, and they will feel an uncontrollable impulse to protect that person. And with that comes some like extra abilities, you know, they're more some kind of superpower-y type things because they become like a protector. I have enjoyed this trilogy for the most part. I enjoyed this final book. It could be slow in parts, but overall enjoyable. I've always really enjoyed the romance in this trilogy. And I really liked that, without spoiling anything, the way that the book ends and the way that everything kind of wraps up at the end. This author definitely didn't go down the path of having everything tied up in a neat little bow. The author very much, I like that the way the world is left is that there's still work to be done, and I really liked that it wasn't like we had this conflict or whatever that we've been addressing across this trilogy and now everything's perfect, because it's very unrealistic to me when that happens a lot of the time, and I love that the author didn't feel that she needed to do that. So I did enjoy this, and I ended up giving this 3.25 stars. Next, I read Scar Tissue by Rachel Craw. So this is a novella set in the series. It's described as being book 3.1, but it is a prequel novella and comes before the trilogy, published after, I believe, but is set prior to the trilogy. This is the 15-page novella that I read, and to me this is just entirely pointless. A 15-page novella can add nothing to the series. It's very hard to put any kind of well-rounded story in only 15 pages. So while the subject matter of this, which I can't go into without spoiling the trilogy, I guess, I found interesting, but in 15 pages, it was just like nothing was really done with it, and I just thought it was kind of pointless. In the end, I gave that 2.5 stars. I then read The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I really, really enjoyed this. This is a historical fiction novel that follows a boy named Daniel who, when he's 10 years old, his father takes him to something called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is an area where a lot of copies of books that are kind of the last one of that book are being kept to, you know, keep that book alive. And his father basically lets him pick out one book to be like his book that he will protect and like know about and like carry on that book's like story. And as Daniel grows up, he realizes that other books by this particular author who wrote the book, which is called The Shadow of the Wind in that book, in this book, his book is called The Shadow of the Wind, he discovers that the other books by this author are being systematically destroyed. And so it's about him discovering what's going on, discovering more about this author and about what happened, his story, and it's all very, very interesting. It has some kind of mystery-ish aspects. It's set in, like, it starts kind of at the end of the war, of the Second World War, and follows Daniel for, like, quite a few years. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was really, really well written. Parts of this felt like the writing was really beautiful. It felt like parts of this were love letters to books. That's what it felt like, and I really, really, really enjoyed that. There were some parts in here that were very confronting. A couple of scenes where when I read it, I had to pause, and I did read this very quickly. I read most of this on New Year's Eve, trying to get this done prior to midnight to get it in for the end of the year. And so, but even trying to rush through it, I definitely had to a couple of times. In one scene in particular, I had to kind of put it to the side for a minute and just like take a breath and really decompress from that moment and then go back into it. I ended up giving this a 4.25 stars. I do think that I did myself a little bit of a disservice by rushing through this the way that I did to get this finished in time for the end of the year, but I did still really love it. I think this maybe would have been like a 4.5 if I hadn't been rushing it. I ended up giving it a 4.25 though. I did still really, really, really enjoy this. And then the final book that I read for December and for 2018 was the webcomic that I read, and that is Check Please Year 3 by Ngozi Ukazu. This is a webcomic that follows a character named Eric Biddle. At the start of the webcomic, he is a freshman at university in Canada, and he is joining the hockey team at his university. He has a figure skating background, and he is a gay character, and he loves baking and all of these types of things, and it's about him becoming a part of that sporting team and about his life as being part of the sport. And each year of the comic follows a year of his life in university. So this was year 3, it was his junior year at the university. And I really, really, really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed every year of this so far. It's just super cute, super enjoyable, and I really, really loved it. And in the end, I gave that one 4 stars. So those are all of the books that I read in the month of December. I would love to chat with you guys in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've read. If you have any thoughts on them, or any great books that you were reading, or any crap books that you were reading in December, I would love to know. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you want to see more from my channel. I'll definitely have a lot of end of the year, beginning of the year type videos coming up very soon for you guys. But that is all I have for this video today. Bye guys!